Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to the final part of my 150 favourite films not ranked for the year 2020. This is the second attempt because Gremlins got the first version of the video that I put up, which I've since deleted because it cut off about half of the video. So we'll give it a go with the second take. Again, this list could have been about 300 films. It is the final video, but I'm going to do an extra video, an epilogue of cutting floor films that used to be on this list in the past years but aren't now. This was kind of suggested by Chris Mohan, and I'll put a link to his channel down below, just to give an idea of the films that I used to have in 150. So I'll try and be as quick as possible. Again, let me know what you think of this list. Which films by the same directors should be on the list. So we'll just start with another Ernst Lubitsch classic. I think To Be or Not to Be is on this list, and this is Notchka, starring the wonderful Greta Garbo and Melvyn Douglas, who's appeared in other Lubitsch, and plenty of Lubitsch regulars. This stars Garbo as a member of the Russian Communist Party who comes to Paris to retrieve stolen jewels, gets involved with Melvyn Douglas, and gets involved with the lure of capitalism and thinking for yourself instead of being a communist. Again, Lubitsch films are usually about more than just what's on the surface. This is a really wonderful story about capitalism and political beliefs and, doing what you're told. And Garbo is wonderful as she starts off completely stony-faced and eventually changes, but even when she laughs it's really odd and funny. Again, the script's wonderful. It's an absolute joy, and it's right up there with To Be or Not to Be and Designed for Living and Trouble in Paradise and all the Shop Around the Corner, which bizarrely still doesn't have a Blu-ray release, even though it's should be right in Kino Lorber's wheelhouse or Arrow Academy. But yes, that's Notchka, which if you haven't seen, you're in for a Garbo treat. Next is Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin. This isn't just an excuse to show off a plain archive edition, even though I don't really need an excuse to show off a plain archive. I'm not the biggest Charlie Chaplin fan. I have a box set that I need to rewatch because I saw them pretty much mostly when I was a child. I was one of those weird people that kind of preferred Harold Lloyd to Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. But for me, Modern Times is still relevant because it's one of the great films about working for a living and literally being a cog in the machine. Obviously, lots of Charlie Chaplin films were political underneath. Obviously, Great Dictator is the more obvious one. But Trouble in Paradise, back to Lubitsch again. Modern Times, because of the political underpinnings, because of its relevance, it's got great set pieces when he literally gets caught in the machine, and how he accidentally gets involved in a protest. It's a wonderful film. It's not as sentimental as some of Chaplin's other work. And again, I think it still stands up today and it still has something to say about today. So next on the list is Howard Hawks' Bringing Up Baby, which I only have on DVD, because again, bizarrely, it's a film that's not on Blu-ray. Please correct me if I'm wrong. From 1938, starring Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. Kind of before Cary Grant was huge. But again, no Blu-ray, which is just bizarre. It's the one about the leopard and the dog called George, the leopard called Baby. It's one of those films they definitely don't make anymore. Screwball comedy at its finest. It's got a script that just zings along, and it's just about perfect. But for some reason, out of all those golden era screwball comedies, it's not available on Blu-ray. It's one of Howard Hawks' best, and it's just an absolute wheeze. If it doesn't put a smile on your face, there's something wrong with you. Next is The Phantom Carriage from 1921, silent Swedish film, directed and starring Victor Sjöström, who, if you're like me, grew up knowing him from Wild Strawberries, playing Professor Borg, and you didn't realise he actually had his own career as a director for years. He really inspired Bergman, and The Phantom Carriage is just an amazing film. It's one of the great silent films. I really need to pick up the Criterion Blu-ray. This is a Criterion DVD, which is by number 579 for those counting at home. It tells the story of this layabout, played by Sjöström himself, and the kind of myth of the last person to die on New Year's Eve gets the job of driving Death's carriage about for the whole of the next year. It's kind of a riff on It's a Wonderful Life before It's a Wonderful Life. A Christmas Carol, pretty much showing the guy what a pathetic swine he's been all his life and trying to get him to repent. But this is Swedish, this isn't Hollywood, so it's a lot tougher. Sjöström plays a complete git. The imagery in the film is just wonderful. It does remind you a little bit about Faust. Even though it's made in 1921 and we kind of know how the tricks were done, there's still a sense of wonder and magic and awe about them that, as we know, CGI just doesn't have, because they're still a physical thing. It's just a beautiful film. It's one of those films that I don't know how I lived so long without seeing it before. It's just a stunning piece of work that I would highly recommend. Next is Takashi Miike's Dead or Alive. Not the whole trilogy, just the first one. Dead or Alive 2 Birds is really good. The third one's kind of patchy, but it's the first one we're going to talk about. I think this was the second Takashi Miike film I saw after Audition. Blew my tiny little mind. And Dead or Alive is one of those films that you really need to see before you die. You could argue it's perhaps not his best film. Obviously Happiness of Katakuris, Audition, Gozu, Ichi the Killer, you could argue for all of them. But Dead or Alive is just a smorgasbord of stunning sights. I mean, you could argue that Miike has had somewhat of an up and down career, but at his best, he shows the audience things that you've just never seen before, even in Japanese cinema, which is saying something. So his films are very rarely boring. There's always something to pique your interest. I mean, the first 10 minutes of this is just the most frenetically cut, edited. You do worry if that's the pacing of the whole of the film, you're just going to have a seizure while you're watching it. It has just about everything to offend everybody. It has every body fluid make an appearance. Obviously body fluids would make an appearance in Ichi the Killer as well. He does love his body fluids. It's pretty much a basic story of a Yakuza versus Triad turf war, but he infuses it with so much weirdness and strangeness. It has one of the greatest endings of all time. It has one of the greatest openings of all time. Yes, it kind of lulls a little bit in the middle, but it kind of has to catch its breath because the audience needs to catch its breath. It's just how to turn a mundane script into something just jaw-dropping. Yeah, Dead or Alive, it's one of those films that you just have to see to believe, pretty much. Next, it's Kimchi Wins' I Saw the Devil, starring Lee Byung-young and Choi Min-sik. Again, this is a Plain Archive steelbook. It's not just an excuse to show off another Plain Archive, but well, anyway. Stunning film. It's a serial killer film that deserves an 18. There's nothing worse than serial killer films that are like 12 certificates or like 15s. It's like I Saw the Devil is real strong meat. It's pretty much about, in the process of fighting monsters, make sure that you don't become a monster yourself. It's obviously stars two titans of Korean cinema. It's dark, it's bloody, it's very strong. But it's an experience, it's visceral, and that's kind of what cinema should be. It's probably right up there with Quiet Family and Bittersweet Life as his best films. Next is The Ruling Class by Peter Medak. Again, you can get this on Criterion DVD. This is a Spanish DVD. Again, a film that desperately needs a Blu-ray upgrade. This is a film that is a bit of a mess, but it's just an amazing mess that you can't take your eyes off of. Peter O'Toole stars as an heir who comes out of a mental hospital believing that he's Jesus, but there's moments where he's also Jack the Ripper. Also stars Alistair Sim, Arthur Lowe as their Marxist butler, Harry Andrews, who was the head of the household before he puts on a tutu and hangs himself, Coral Brown. There's a great turn by Nigel Green in an amazing scene where he and Peter O'Toole almost have a standoff as who's madder, because Nigel Green believes he's the god of electricity. Yeah, it has to be seen to be believed. There's musical numbers, there's songs. There's a great rendition of, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, which is just bizarre. Again, it's 153 minutes long, directed by Peter Medak, who had a very interesting career. You could argue it doesn't quite work, but it's such an interesting, bizarre film that it stands up to repeated viewings. It's one that is relatively new to me, but I've already watched it like 3 times. There's so much going on, and again you feel this kind of ideas thrown to the wall, and they all perhaps don't always land, but it's another great Peter O'Toole performance. He goes from mad to dangerously sane and everything in between. It's just another film that you have to see. It's another one of those films that could only be made in the 70s, but it's so much fun and it's an experience. Next is the second Coen Brothers film on this 150 list. It's The Big Lebowski. Again, strangely enough, a bit like Ruling Class, not necessarily a film that is plot driven and the plot is the most important thing. It's more the characters and what happens to them as we grow to like them and love them. The Big Lebowski was the inspiration for the Folgers and Ashes podcast, which you should check out. It's such a funny film. Jeff Bridges doesn't really act, because apparently that's pretty much the dude is Jeff Bridges. There's great turns by John Goodman, Steve Buscemi, and John Turturro as Jesus. Sadly, I have seen the first 20 minutes of the 2019 belated offshoot Jesus Rolls, which is absolutely dire, I'm afraid. I had to switch it off after 20 minutes. But I know there's a lot of Coen Brothers fans who don't get it. The same way the other film on the list, which I think is their best film, Miller's Crossing, there's lots of Coen Brothers fans who don't get Miller's Crossing either, because it's not kind of kooky enough, but then they also don't get Big Lebowski because it's like too off the wall. There's great lines that when the guy holds up the bowling ball and asks the dude what it is, and the dude goes, obviously you're not a golfer. It's just got sublime moments throughout. It's got broad comedy, and it's got lovely little one-liners that you have to pay attention to as well. It's an absolute blast. It's hard to believe it's 22 years old now, in 1998. So up next is 3 Indicator titles. First one is Jacques Tournier's Night of the Demon. This is one of the earlier Indicator releases that I got, and is a perfect example of why Indicator are so good. You could argue, well, they don't have too many masterpieces in their collection, but their extras and packaging are just wonderful. This one has 4 different cuts of the film. It's about Dana Andrews, who's never really been my favourite person in the world, or favourite actor in the world, as a skeptic who goes around the world disproving all these stories of witchcraft and heebie-jeebies, and he comes to Britain to investigate the death of a professor, and he meets this shady character Julian Carswell, who seems to be in league with the devil and black magic. It's just full of wonderful dread. It does have perhaps a flaw that the next film shares, but it's just so good. I remember seeing this when I was young, and it having quite the effect on me. So next is The Beast Must Die. Now, The Beast Must Die is not a great film, but this is the favourite 150, not the greatest 150. And it suffers from the same problem as Night of the Demon, in fact, that the creature isn't really that impressive. But it's a wonderful Agatha Christie kind of werewolf whodunit. You have these wonderful characters who are trapped in a country house on an island, like Calvin Lockhart, the big game hunter, and he wants to hunt a werewolf. You have Peter Cushing with a dodgy Swedish accent. You have Charles Gray, as dry as ever. You have a very young Michael Gambon as a concert pianist. It's just so much fun. Again, is it a great film? No. Am I biased? Yes. But this was one of the most exciting Indicator announcements when they realised that it was coming to Blu-ray, because there was a Severin Blu-ray in the US, but apparently the print is not that good, whereas The Beast Must Die on Indicator, the print is lovely. Made by Amicus. It was one of their last horror films in 1974. It's just, I remember seeing it when I was young again and scared the life out of me. It's not scary now. It does have the wonderful gimmick of the film stopping and giving you 30 seconds to guess who the werewolf is, which Paul Annette, the director, really didn't like. But it just gives it an extra little flavour. Anton Diffring's in it again. I forgot to mention Anton Diffring. He's wonderful as Calvin Lockhart's eyes and ears in the mansion. there's like things that perhaps you can see being influenced an Alien and Aliens. There's scenes that are very tense. There's like locators and beeps, and the werewolf's coming back to the house, and it's very tense, and it's just like Aliens essentially, with the little beepers to tell you where they are. It's a wonderful film, but most people would probably think it's average, which, to be fair, objectively it may be, but it's still one of my favourites. Next is Charlie Varrick, directed by Don Siegel, very economically like Don Siegel does, starring Walter Matthau in a slightly harsher, less comedic role than what we're used to seeing. Also starring Andy Robinson as his bank robbing pal after Dirty Harry, and Joe Don Baker as one of the nastiest, most villainous villains, not villain but heavy in cinema history. It's about a small time bank robber, Charlie Varrick, strangely enough, who robs this bank, but unfortunately it happens to be a front for the mafia. So obviously the mafia aren't pleased and send Joe Don Baker to pretty much kill anybody that was involved. It moves along wonderfully. Again, even at 111 minutes, it's all about character. It's all about this driving force, this threat of Joe Don Baker. It's actually very similar to No Country for Old Men as far as the actual plot and the kind of template of it. It's a defining Walter Matthau film. It's just so good. Made in 1973. If you haven't seen it, it's awesome. Again, I think that was one of my first Indicator releases. Again, with Indicator, great extras. There's a 75-minute making of Charlie Varrick from 2015. There's a 75-minute John Player lecture with Don Siegel. There's a wonderful 89-minute Guardian lecture with Walter Matthau. You know, the extras are just stunning, as they are 90% of the time with Indicator releases. So if you haven't seen Charlie Varrick, I would highly recommend you do. Next is something a little different, and it's Coraline, a children's film which is actually way darker than your standard children films. From the same director as A Nightmare Before Christmas, which I've only recently realised. Voiced by Dakota Fanning. It's about parallel lives, parallel worlds. It's got a talking cat in it. The animation style is really quite beautiful. I think it's the same studio that did Kubo and the Two Strings, which is excellent as well. It's a lovely little film. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say about Coraline apart from it's lovely, even though it's dark and disturbing. It's not really for kids. There is a 3D version. I haven't seen it in 3D, but I'm sure it would look gorgeous in 3D. Next is a Mamet classic. It's House of Games. Homicide was on the list, and House of Games from 1987 was his debut. It was the first Mamet I saw. This is Criterion Spine number 999. That's the Blu-ray, and that's the DVD. I think I fell in love with Mamet's dialogue immediately. Joe Mantegna is in top form, because obviously he worked in the theatre with Mamet. Ricky Jay, Mike Nussbaum, JT Walsh turns up. Lindsay Krause is the lead as a psychiatrist who gets caught in the world of con men. The film is full of short cons, long cons. It's really dark and nasty. He would do The Spanish Prisoner later, which is kind of a lighter, airier version of House of Games, which is kind of darker and more cynical. It's just a wonderful, wonderful film. If you haven't seen Mamet before, it's a good place to start. just to get that ear for his dialogue, and then go on and watch Homicide, which is arguably his best film, which was on this list in an earlier episode. Obviously Oleana and the classic Glengarry Glen Ross, even though he didn't direct that, but it's obviously from his stage play and script. Next is another Howard Hawks, The Big Sleep, my favourite Bogart and Bacall. Again, the twisty-turny plot isn't really that important. It's the characters and the interaction between the characters, and the interaction between Bogart and Bacall is awesome. The script is just full of just acerbic, nasty little barbs. Bogart is in control for most of the film. Again, it's another film that they just don't make anymore, just because they can't, because they don't have the talent anymore. It's just a wonderful film. Again, not a lot to say, apart from great script, star power, and it just flies along. It's just wonderful. And finally, for the last film in this series, which I hope you've enjoyed. Yes, just to remind you, I will be doing a cutting floor episode of the films that used to be on this list but aren't now. It's Truffaut's last film, the last film in this series, and it's called Finally Sunday. I thought I would just get all the last ones out. Made in 1983, and it's the perfect double bill for The Big Sleep in the fact that it's a tribute to film noir, it's a tribute to actresses like Lauren Bacall, because Fanny Ardant is dressed throughout the film like Bacall in many of her films. It stars Jean-Louis Trintignant and Fanny Ardant, two of my favourite actors. And it works not only as a homage to those films of the 30s and 40s and 50s, but also it stands alone as its own quirky little murder mystery. It's so good, so much fun. It will put a smile on your face. Fanny Ardant is transcendent and effervescent. Trintignant, who I should really do a video on because he's had an amazing career, from conforming to being a mute gunslinger, to being an old man, to being a pervert, to being a judge, to being a brain in a tank. He's ran the gamut of performances. It's a really lovely little film in the sense that, spoiler alert, you see Jean-Louis Trintignant blowing somebody away with a shotgun in the first 5 minutes of the film. But then as other deaths mount up, Fanny Ardant comes to his defence and doesn't think he did any of them. I'm not going to tell you how it finishes if you haven't seen it, but it's just a wonderfully sly, quintessentially French, just wonderful film. Lots of it takes place at night. There's that French night feel to it, which I don't know whether it makes any sense, but you know what I mean. Again, the plot perhaps doesn't really matter as much as just that chemistry between the two leads, very much like in The Big Sleep. And like I said, Fanny Ardant is just magical in it, and Jean-Louis Trintignant's excellent as always. So it's a very nice homage, but it also works in its own right. Because I don't know who said it, whether it was Godard or Truffaut. I've got a feeling it was one of the French directors that said cinema should be about life, but it should also be about cinema. And that's exactly what Finally Sunday is about. Yes, it's about loyalty and murder and mystery, but it is also about cinema as well. And I think that is a very apt place for the final film in my favourite 150, not ranked, of 2020. Now hopefully I'll do this again sometime and see what new films have popped in, what's dropped out. And like I said, I will be doing a cutting floor episode of the films that used to be on my top 100 or top 150 list, but aren't anymore. Doesn't mean they're bad films, they've just kind of fallen out of favour a little bit. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you've actually seen the proper full version this time, and hopefully you'll join me again. I'll leave a link to Chris Mohan's video channel, because he suggested the cutting floor episode, and hopefully we'll join you again. Thank you much for watching. This is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, saying farewell.